The world watches as former President Donald Trump makes a bold move in the ongoing Ukraine crisis. He has proposed a deal, one that could reshape the geopolitical landscape. Trump has demanded that Ukraine cede control of key industries, mining, ports and more, in exchange for continued US support. This proposition has sent shockwaves through international relations, raising critical questions about US national security, the future of NATO and the global balance of power. The stakes are incredibly high. Ukraine, locked in a desperate struggle for survival against Russian aggression, finds itself caught between a rock and a hard place. Accepting Trump's deal could mean economic subjugation, a bitter pill to swallow for a nation fighting for its very existence, yet rejecting Trump's offer carries its own set of risks. Ukraine is heavily reliant on US military and financial aid to resist the Russian invasion. Refusal could mean a cut-off of this lifeline, leaving Ukraine vulnerable to further Russian advances. This audacious move by Trump has thrown the international community into a state of uncertainty. It has also exposed the fragility of the Western alliance and the challenges posed by the resurgence of great power competition. Trump's proposed deal with Ukraine has profound implications for US national security interests. At its core, the deal undermines a key principle of the post-World War II order, the sovereignty of nations. By pressuring Ukraine to relinquish control of its economic assets, Trump is effectively legitimizing the use of coercion and exploitation in international relations. This sets a dangerous precedent, signaling to other powerful nations that they can act with impunity on the world stage. Such actions erode the rules-based international order that the United States has long championed. Moreover, Trump's deal threatens to alienate key US allies in Europe. Many European nations view Russia's aggression in Ukraine as a direct threat to their own security and have stood firmly with the United States in supporting Ukraine. Trump's willingness to strike a deal with Ukraine, potentially at the expense of Ukrainian interests, raises serious doubts about the reliability of US commitments to its allies. This erosion of trust could have long-term consequences for the strength and cohesion of the NATO alliance, a cornerstone of European security for decades. The North Atlantic Treaty Organization, NATO, has been the bedrock of Western security since its inception in 1949. The alliance, founded on the principle of collective defense, has served as a bulwark against aggression and a guarantor of peace and stability in Europe. However, Trump's proposed deal with Ukraine threatens to drive a wedge between the United States and its European allies, weakening this vital alliance. European nations are already wary of Trump's transactional approach to foreign policy, characterized by his America First rhetoric and his skepticism of multilateral institutions. His willingness to prioritize perceived US interests, even if it means undermining allies or compromising democratic values, has sown seeds of doubt about the future of transatlantic relations. The Ukraine deal exacerbates these concerns. By seemingly prioritizing a quick fix in Ukraine over the long-term security of Europe, Trump risks alienating key NATO members who view Russia as an existential threat. This could lead to a fracturing of the alliance, with some European nations questioning the wisdom of continued reliance on the United States for their security. For Russian President Vladimir Putin, Trump's actions represent a golden opportunity to advance his own geopolitical agenda. Putin seeks to restore Russia's status as a great power and to weaken Western institutions like NATO that he views as threats to Russian security. Trump's proposed deal with Ukraine plays directly into Putin's hands. It undermines US credibility on the world stage, weakens the Western alliance, and potentially leaves Ukraine vulnerable to further Russian aggression. A divided and weakened West is precisely what Putin needs to achieve his goals. He can exploit the cracks in the Western alliance to further his own ambitions in Eastern Europe and beyond. Putin has long sought to sow discord among Western nations, and Trump's actions provide him with ample ammunition. By exploiting these divisions, Putin aims to create a more favorable security environment for Russia and to reassert Russian influence in regions it considers to be within its sphere of influence. As the United States grapples with the fallout from Trump's proposed Ukraine deal, another global power is watching closely: China. Beijing views the evolving situation with a mix of concern and opportunity. On the one hand, China recognizes the inherent instability that Trump's actions inject into the international system. China, like many other nations, benefits from a rules-based global order, even if it occasionally seeks to bend those rules to its advantage. Trump's willingness to disregard established norms and undermine international institutions creates uncertainty and raises the risk of miscalculation, which could have unintended consequences for China's own economic and security interests. On the other hand, China also sees potential strategic advantages in a weakened and divided West. A distracted and internally focused United States is less able to effectively counter China's growing assertiveness in Asia and beyond. China may seek to exploit this opportunity to advance its own interests, potentially by strengthening its economic and military ties with Russia, expanding its influence in the developing world, or increasing pressure on Taiwan. Section 6. A world adrift, the erosion of global order. Trump's proposed deal with Ukraine is not an isolated incident. It is part of a larger trend of declining US leadership and a weakening of the rules-based international order that has governed global affairs for decades. This trend is characterized by several factors, including the rise of nationalist and populist movements around the world, the growing assertiveness of revisionist powers like China and Russia, and the increasing difficulty of achieving international cooperation on pressing global challenges. The erosion of the global order has profound implications for international peace and security. Without a strong and reliable framework for managing international relations, the world risks descending into a more chaotic and dangerous era marked by increased competition, mistrust, and conflict. This is a future that should concern all nations, regardless of their size or power. Section 7, the price of transactionalism, eroding trust, emboldening adversaries. Trump's approach to foreign policy, often described as transactional, has raised concerns about the erosion of trust in the United States as a reliable partner. Transactionalism, in essence, prioritizes short-term gains and quid pro quo arrangements over long-term relationships and shared values. While all nations engage in transactional diplomacy to some extent, Trump's emphasis on this approach has been particularly pronounced, often at the expense of traditional alliances and partnerships. This approach has had several negative consequences. First, it has eroded trust among US allies, who worry that the United States may not honor its commitments if doing so is not deemed to be in the immediate national interest. Second, it has emboldened adversaries like Russia and China, who sense an opportunity to exploit the perceived decline in US leadership and to advance their own interests at the expense of the United States and its allies. Third, it has undermined the effectiveness of international institutions and norms, making it more difficult to address global challenges such as climate change, pandemics, and nuclear proliferation. In a world facing increasingly complex and interconnected challenges, a transactional approach to foreign policy is simply inadequate. Section 8. The future of power, cooperation or conflict. The world stands at a crossroads. The old order, characterized by US leadership and a rules-based system, is fraying. The future remains uncertain, but two broad paths lie ahead, one of continued competition and conflict, and another of renewed cooperation and collaboration. The path of competition is fraught with risk. It is a path that leads to increased mistrust, arms races, and the potential for miscalculation and conflict. The path of cooperation, while more difficult to navigate, offers the best hope for a more peaceful and prosperous future. It requires nations to recognize their shared interests, to build trust, and to work together to address common challenges. The choices made in the coming years will have profound consequences for generations to come. The world must choose wisely. GAP 2S Section 9, the debate pros and cons of Trump's move. As the world grapples with the implications of Donald Trump's proposed deal with Ukraine, opinions are deeply divided. Let's delve into the arguments from both sides of this contentious issue. On one hand, proponents argue that Trump's move is a bold step towards redefining international alliances. They believe that it could potentially lead to a more balanced global power structure, reducing America's overextended commitments and allowing for a more strategic allocation of resources. Supporters assert that this deal could foster a new era of cooperation between the US and Russia, potentially stabilizing a volatile region and opening up new avenues for diplomatic engagement. However, critics are quick to highlight the potential risks. They argue that such a deal undermines the sovereignty of Ukraine, a nation striving for independence and democracy. Critics warn that this move could signal a dangerous precedent, encouraging other powerful nations to exert undue influence over smaller states. They also caution that this could weaken the trust and solidarity within the Western alliance, emboldening adversaries and leading to a more fragmented and unstable international order. Both sides present compelling arguments, underscoring the complexity and high stakes of this geopolitical maneuver. The world watches closely as leaders weigh these factors, knowing that the decisions made today will shape the global landscape for years to come. Gap 3 SS. And now we move to our final segment. Section 9, Conclusion, A World on the Brink. Donald Trump's proposed deal with Ukraine has exposed the deep fissures in the post-Cold War order. It highlights the challenges posed by resurgent great power competition, the erosion of trust among traditional allies, and the fragility of international norms. The world is at a tipping point. The actions of leaders in Washington, Moscow, Beijing, and other capitals will determine whether the future is defined by cooperation or conflict. One thing is certain: the stakes have never been higher. The world is watching, and the consequences of inaction are too great to ignore.